Hello, folks, and thanks for listening to the Planet Shivers podcast. I just want to give you guys a little intro to this episode. This interview was done in 2017 for a previous podcast I was working on, but the interview was so good and so insightful that I asked Bob Wright's permission to use it again for this podcast series. The recording quality is a little iffy because at that time I wasn't quite all set up the way I am now, and I hope that doesn't get in the way of the quality of the show. Hope you guys enjoy.
I will talk to you of art.
Yes.
For there is nothing else.
Are you all ready to join me today on our trip to outer space?
Come along quietly or not.
You can have all the talent in the world and never get anywhere. Some artists may take hold and let you bite upon it.
And now, without further ado,
Coming to you loud and clear.
Sitting here with Bob Wright, and I'm going to let you introduce yourself.
Okay, hi Albert. It's really great to be here with you doing this. And my background, I'm from Staten Island, New York, and I'm a songwriter, and I've kind of specialized in the last 15 years or so in writing songs about where I'm from. I do other things too. I have a big, long bluegrass background. I was in a band called the Risky Business Bluegrass Band for about 20 years. And so a lot of people think of me as a bluegrass player, and that influences a lot of what I do. But what I really like to call it is the songs I write are neo-traditional in the sense that I want to honor the tradition, and I want people to be able to hear the tradition in there, but I want it to be something new, something that I've created that reflects on maybe things that are happening now, or even the things that happened in the past that come forward with us, because those things are part of who we are and what we do, whether we want to believe it or not.
And a lot of the music you do is based on the history of Staten Island.
Yep.
So, can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I have a fairly long history with Staten Island. I mean, my mother's family has been there probably since maybe the 1840s, certainly the 1860s. My father's family, not as long. They came there in about 1906 or something. But and my grandfather, his father was a tugboat captain and worked in the harbor, and his tug was on Staten Island. And so my mother's mother was born there.
Okay.
And had some. She was a real storyteller and had some great stories. And they all loved music. My mother was a dancer. My father was a big college football star, but so he could dance well too. And family parties were always about dancing. Their generation was big band music, so we listened to a lot of that. But my mother knew all kinds of dances and a lot of Irish music. Traditional American folk songs, probably, people would listen to or know, and as a kid growing up, you would hear those things. As far as it's indigenous music to Staten Island, that's harder to pin down,
Right.
Because New York is a tricky place that way. When you go to North Carolina or Virginia, and I go down those places, and I know a lot of people down there, and there's great music down there, but the songs have seemed like they've grown out of the ground there. Because they've been at times they were isolated by the hollers and stuff. But New York, because it's such a dynamic place with so many different people coming and going all the time, it changes a lot. So it's hard to get a grip on what's hardcore New York folk music or traditional music. But the good thing about that is you're influenced by everything. And I always had pretty open ears as far as listening to music. Obviously I got caught up in the big folk thing,
Right.
and started listening to the Kingston Trio, like a lot of guys I knew, banjo players, particularly I play banjo, guitar, mandolin, and stuff, and a lot of banjo players cite the Kingston Trio as an early influence. And from there, quickly got into Pete Seeger and when Earl Scruggs. It just blew my brain apart, But I think what you do is you start to trace back. It's like, wow, I like this guy, but where did he come from? How did he develop that? How did he learn to play that? Who taught him? And what was he listening to, you know? And Earl, for instance, he talked about when he was a kid, they got a record player down there in North Carolina, and 3 records came, it was a crank, you know, gramophone kind of thing, and 3 records came with it, and one of them was a song by the New Orleans Rhythm Kings called the Farewell Blues, which he turned into one of his most popular banjo tunes, which I play too once in a while, you know, but there's that lineage that comes through the music. First time I heard really like Bill Monroe was a friend of mine in high school. He sang Muleskin of Blues in the auditorium one day and just knocked me out, you know, and it sounded great. And when I listened to Monroe at that time as like a 16-year-old, whatever I was like, oh my God, my ears hurt, you know, because I wasn't, you know, it's like you're trying to drink something straight
Right.
when you've never tried it before, and it takes some time to appreciate his genius. And I think I mentioned to you about his feeling was you play the ancient tones, and, you know, and Monroe was pretty strong in his likes and dislikes, and his influences came in that way too. He grew up, his family all played, and he lived with his Uncle Penn, who was a fiddler who played lots of dances and stuff. But the third guy they played with was a guy named Arnold Schwartz, who was a black guy, and he was a blues player. And Monroe always credited him with putting the blues into bluegrass, because bluegrass was different, you know, than country music at that time, even though it was still called country music. And the funny thing with bluegrass is it's contemporary with rock and roll. You know, they both started in the late 40s, early 50s. You know, growing out of other traditions, in the same tradition. You know, rock and roll was more Memphis, and bluegrass was more, you know, Tennessee, Kentucky, Bristol, the Bristol area, you know, where Jimmy Rogers and all those guys recorded. I mean, I bought that book with me, that Barry Mazur book, which is about the Bristol sessions and Ralph Peer, and it was just amazing how catalytic all that coming together there was in that one spot, you know, which just happened to be kind of a good crossroads where everybody could meet.
So, Bob, what would you say at the time was the main way that this music got spread around?
Well, it was the availability of recordings, I think, that really kick-started a lot of it, because once people realized that, you know, they've been sitting around wherever they were, whether they were in upstate New York or down in North Carolina, wherever they were, they realized that, hey, you know, I can make some money doing this. And now it was available for other people to hear it. If you lived in a small town anywhere in this country, you might spend your whole life within a 20-mile period.
Right.
So you don't know anybody else's dialect. You don't know anybody else's music. Now when it starts to become more universal, people are starting to listen to other things. You take, you know, Charlie Poole. He, like a lot of guys down there, played what was popular a lot of times, not just, you know, Barbara Allen and you know and old English folk songs.
Right.
And a lot of those towns, they would hire professional musicians, serious musicians, to come down and teach people. You know, and they teach them opera, they teach them classical music, they teach them a lot of different things. And so those guys, and they were just starting to see movies and stuff, and it influenced a lot of the way the music went and the different influences and tempos and things that came into it. I mean, Pete Seeger said one time, I think there's 5, I don't remember exactly, 5 rhythms that are common to every music. You know, so if you hit the right one, everybody can relate to it because it's common to everybody.
There were a lot of musicians who were very hesitant to record because they had a successful live show in the early days recording. Because I know, like, Bessie Smith didn't want to initially record because it was known that, like, the record industries weren't, they would screw you over.
Well, what goes around comes around.
Right.
It's kind of like what's happening now. I mean, the only way you make money is going out and playing, because it's very difficult to sell CDs because a lot of people don't want to buy CDs anymore, and a lot of people don't want to pay for music, period.
Right.
And yeah, that was a fear with a lot of people, like, okay, I'm going to make this one record, and, you know, 50,000 people can listen to it, but they're not paying to come see me, you know.
Right.
Yeah, the whole recording thing. I mean, and I think obviously there was a period probably from the 50s until 15 years ago where people made a lot of money from recordings.
Mhm.
I mean, like, outrageous
Right.
amounts of money, which is not probably ever going to happen again. So people weren't so afraid of recording anymore,
Mhm.
But I think the other thing that a lot of players were afraid of when they just got paid for the session. If they got that,
Right.
and their names weren't put, most importantly, on the album as the owner of the copyright of the song,
Mhm.
And so any royalties, and that's where the big money is.
Right.
You get the royalties for that song being played,
Mhm.
but whoever was producing them or managing them would put their name on there.
Right.
So if somebody come in, you get, like you're talking Ma Rainey before. I mean, in the play Black Bottom, that's what she's talking about a lot. How he's putting his name on it, and he's giving us like $25 for the session, which was a lot of money then, but it's one session, and he's going to sell 10, 20,
Right.
30,000 records, and he's going to make a ton of money, and that was a big fear for a lot of people.
That man sure does blow a wicked whistle, don't he?
Women blues singers,
Oh yeah.
for that, and or to be lesbian.
Yeah.
And it's probably more common than we thought. My grandmother used to talk about on Staten Island. This she was referred to as Starlight Kitty and Moonlight Nell,
Mhm.
which I wrote a song about them.
Yes.
And she said there were some women who hung out in the bars, but so I created this scenario about what probably was like for them.
Drift in a place where the boys knew the faces and the smoke from the bars hid their eyes. They could be who you wanted without any traces of malice and traces of lies. Then they danced at the Castleton high on a hill, or wait by the Silver Lake side. Starlight Kitty and Moonlight Nell. Come on, boys, let's go for a ride. Well, they walked everywhere, and the women would stare as they walked hand in hand through the streets. And they welcomed the night when the flicker of gaslight made them both beauties to see. Then they danced at the Castleton high on a hill, or wait by the Silver Lake side. Starlight Kitty and Moonlight Nell. Come on, boys, let's go for a ride. Starlight Kitty and Moonlight Nell. Come on, boys, let's go for a ride.
Yeah. Huh. I've been listening to because that's on the Harbortown CD,
Yeah.
and I've been listening to that song. It's cool. to have that background to it now.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a true story. I mean, a lot of the stuff on my CDs are based in the truth. When I did the Oyster one, a woman called me up. Her name's Emily Driscoll. It's still her name, actually. When I finished the CD, I'd gotten a grant to do it. And I wanted to just kind of encapsulate what New York was like when oysters were still a viable thing. And because it was a huge industry in New York City. And so Emily calls me up, and I had sent out a bunch of CDs. And I sent one to New Jersey Baykeepers Association.
Mm-hmm.
She was over there filming. She's a documentary filmmaker.
Okay.
And she was doing a film about oysters. And she was over there filming. And they gave her the CD, and they said, "You should have this CD. You should hear this." You know?
Mm-hmm.
So she took it home and listened to it, and calls me up. She says, "Could I use some of your songs in my documentary?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure." She says, "It's funny." She said, "It's like you read my mind." She said, "It's like you must have done the same research I did, because everything on here just meshes with everything I've done." And I said, "Well, I did a lot of research for it, because if I'm going to do it, I want it to be as accurate as it can be.
Right.
It's always never going to be 100%. But so she did. She did a documentary called Shell Shocked, and she just, bits and pieces of a couple of songs, and then there's a banjo instrumental on there called Oyster Aristocracy that she used kind of throughout a lot of the film.
Cool.
It's kind of a quiet banjo kind of piece. But yeah, you just don't know where those things will go,
Yeah.
But doing the research and being accurate is pretty important, I think.
Yeah, that's like, I don't know, I feel like that kind of Staten Island history, unless you dig, for me, unless I dig for it, I don't really find too much about it. Because it feels like the forgotten borough. And it's joked about, but it's is in a way.
Yeah, and it's changing, I think. I mean, that's why I did the Harbortown CD when I did it, because I always told people, I just got tired of people telling me that nothing happened here, and And what I get from people at shows is they'll come up and say, "Oh man, I didn't know that about Staten Island," and they always say almost the same thing. It's like, it almost makes me proud to be from here. I
You
tell them
almost.
I'm working on the almost,
Yeah.
you know, and even the Oyster CD that came about because I wanted to keep, because Staten Island, I mean, that was its main living for a long time. It was a huge oystering place. There were billions of oysters in the harbor that the Dutch ate through them, and then the English,
Right.
and then they started bringing them up from down south, the sprats, to seed the oyster beds because they weren't flourishing anymore. And that's how Sandy Ground started. You know, that free black was one of the first free black communities in the country. It was guys coming up on the oyster boats and going, I don't have to go back. I can do this here, you know.
So yeah, would you mind going a little bit more into that?
Went into Sandy Ground? Or?
Yeah.
Yeah, Sandy Ground was on the south shore of Staten Island. Like I said, they're mostly from like Snow Hill, Maryland, down in that area. The black oystermen would come up on the oyster sloops to bring up the seed oysters to replenish the beds because there was so many oysters being eaten by, and the oysters were shipped all over the world and all over the country, and they had a hard time keeping up with the demand. Then they would have to reseed the beds every once in a while, and they came up and they were out there in Raritan Bay, and I guess looking at Staten Island and thinking, well, you know, why should I go back and be a slave? And I can just stay here, you know. And they did, and they flourished. They had their own oyster boats, and the community is not really so much there anymore, which is a shame. There's a little museum out there. There's about 3 or 4 of the original houses, and the churchyard and the cemetery that is still there. And you know, there's a few descendants who kind of keep the flame alive, which is good.
Came up here from Maryland, from a place they call Snow Hill, where you had to be as white as snow to exercise free will. I heard the oysters here were sweet as any to be found, so I took a chance and I ran away to live in Sandy Ground. So pull them tongs good and strong and bring the boat about. There's oysters on the bottom and the tide is running out. Ain't no pearls to give the girls, no treasures to be found, but it's oysters pays for supper when you live in Sandy Ground. Well, I love the tapping of the waves underneath the hull, and love the taste of salty water and the laughing gulls. I wouldn't trade the life I've got with any to be found, and I wouldn't want to lead a life without my Sandy Ground. Pull them tongs good and strong and bring the boat about. There's oysters on the bottom and the tide is running out. Ain't no pearls to give the girls, no treasures to be found, but it's oysters pays for supper when you live in Sandy Ground. Well, the sun is fading in the west, I have to go, my friend. You can see the light at Princess Bay out there to guide me in. I'll sleep tonight in my own bed, and when I lay me down, I'll say a prayer of thanks that there's a place like Sandy Ground. So pull them tongs good and strong and bring the boat about. There's oysters on the bottom and the tide is running out. Ain't no pearls to give the girls, no treasure to be found, but it's oysters pays for supper when you live in Sandy Ground. Ain't no pearls to give the girls, no treasures to be found, but it's oysters pays for supper when you live in Sandy Ground.
They closed the oyster beds in 1927 because people were getting sick.
Okay.
You know, because from the pollution. They probably should have closed them 20 years earlier. But and they started growing strawberries out there in Sandy Ground and selling those. And one of the most interesting characters was, I don't know if there's a song on there about it that might be on the Dyra CD. There's a black guy named Thomas Downing, who the oyster guys on Staten Island would have known well. He was one of the most famous and successful businessman in New York City. He had an oyster bar called Downing's Oyster Bar down around Wall Street, and made a ton of money. He was shipping stuff all over the world, and he was from down south originally, I believe. But he would go out himself to the oyster boats and check over the catch and get the best stuff for his place and bring it back. I mean, he bailed out white people, you know, with newspapers and stuff with his money.
Right.
And they had a big, huge parade for him when he died. You know, he's really, really cool guy. And of course, there's always stories about him being involved with the Underground Railroad.
Mm-hmm.
I did a song about him too. That was kind of cool because my niece was teaching up at the Little Red Schoolhouse in the Village, which, you know, has always been a kind of interesting school, progressive school. You know, Pete Seeger used to go over there and do workshops and sing, and I think Eric Weisberg went to school there. And so my niece called me up and she said, "Well, we're studying, well, I guess, the Underground Railroad." She was teaching a 4th grade class, and she said, "And I bought in your CD and I played the Thomas Downing. I played it. I gave it to the music teacher, and he wants to use the Downing's Oyster Bar song with the kids." So I was like, "Oh, sure, you know, no problem."
Right.
And she said, "But they're putting together a whole show for the end of the year.
Okay.
Do you think you could come in and work with the kids and teach them the song, and maybe do some other stuff?" So I went in for a couple of days, and you know, two different 4th grade classes, and I taught them the song, and you know, follow the drinking gourd, and you know, some of those kinds of things, and it was fun. And they invited me back for the final show. In the meantime, I'd gone back to the studio and had the engineer take out the vocals, so that they could have the backing track for the show. So I went to the show, and they just killed it. I mean, it was so cool, you know. They played the song, they sang it, and you know, it was their final number of their show and everything, and it was really, really kind of cool. But you know, but those things, you know, I mean, that's kind of why you write songs. Hopefully that people will use them in a productive way. You know? A year or so ago, 2 years ago, I called it 50 Folk in Years, just to kind of celebrate having. I did it on April 4th, 2015, which would have been exactly 50 years from the very first time I actually played out in public in high school, and that was fun to do because I did a lot of songs that had influenced me, plus a lot of my own songs too, and got into jug bands and that kind of stuff, and because I saw Queskin Jug Band on the old Steve Allen show.
Okay.
You know, and they just blew my head apart. You know, because they were so much fun and so good. And but I didn't get their name. It's like I'm like shit. Yeah. I didn't get their name, so I go away to college.
Right.
And I walk into this guy's room, and the Queskin album is laying on the bed there, and I'm like, "That's who they were." You know, where did you get that? I want to. So I used to go see them.
Okay.
You know, when they came into New York. And actually, Jim Queskin is going to be playing. I'm playing in Liverpool the end of the month on the 26th at the Everyman Folk Club, and Jim Queskin is playing there the following month, which is cool. And I met him a couple of times, but I knew Bill Keith, the banjo player, fairly well.
So you mentioned the Kingston Trio was one of your first influences. What were like some other like early influences, and then as you got into being a musician?
Well, probably like I said, you know, growing up, we had a lot of big band music in the house, that kind of stuff, and I loved Hoagie Carmichael, especially, you know, he did that Lazy Bones, was like, listen, like, lazy bone, sleeping in the sun, never gonna get your day's work done, you're never gonna get it done, sleeping in the noonday sun. Then that's when I realized that, you know, and this is because everybody talks about much later on with this, when the whole singer-songwriter thing started, everybody started writing their own songs because they got away from Tin Pan Alley.
Right.
He was the first person I really remember doing his own songs, you know, and that just kind of blew me away because everybody else would get songs from songwriters, and you never really saw the songwriters or heard the songwriters until much later on.
Right.
And then, like I said, when I saw Chuck Berry, and again, one of the obviously his guitar work fascinated me, but it was also his lyrics, because they were so clever and so much fun, and they spoke of things that I wasn't that familiar with, and it kind of went from there. With the folk music, that obviously that the Kingston Trio were more commercial kind of folk act,
Right.
so they were pretty accessible, but they were doing songs that were traditional songs, a lot of them, and started to delve into that. And then when I heard Earl Scruggs, playing the bluegrass stuff, they were doing a lot of that kind of stuff too, and it kind of branched out from there. When I heard the jug band, that it sounded so familiar because it was such a part of America, but it was really kind of different from everything I heard before because they synthesized it in a different way, the different styles. Because the jug bands, most of them came out of Memphis.
Yeah.
Gus Cannon. They stole Gus Cannon's song. He finally got royalties for it.
Yeah.
You know this song?
Yeah, you could.
Yeah, Walk Right In.
Yeah.
That was a Gus Cannon song. And he eventually, I think, did, because he was still alive.
Yeah.
And he did get some royalties from that. And that's people taking, homemade instruments, homemade sound, and taking something and making it their own, and having fun with it. That Jim Kweskin, speaking of, he put an album out with a bunch of people a few years ago called the Texas Sheiks. Okay. And I put one or two cuts on those CDs from those guys, clearly influenced by them, but with a little bit more modern presentation. Well, certainly sonically,
Right.
It's much more there, but some cool stuff.
And now a quick word from Ajax.
Mit Stageax, der Schäumige Glänzer, schwenkt der Hub den Schmutz und Rain.
Buck Dancer's Moon, where I was walking in Manhattan and I was looking around and everybody was on their phones, as they are. And I was thinking, every interaction is there's some kind of transmission going through the air to create that.
Yeah.
Those radio waves are in the air.
Yeah.
And so how do you translate that into an old-timey song, So I started thinking about, what if fiddle tunes, when you play a fiddle tune or you play any music, it just goes into the ether. The sound just travels off and who knows where it goes.
Right.
Well, what if they bounce off the moon? So this is... When the air's too full of fiddle tunes and the dances are worn out, they need some old buck dancers just to dance them fiddles down. 'Cause the fiddle tunes, they don't disappear, they don't stay in the room. They keep on rising upwards and they bounce right off the moon. And the moon, it turns a nearer blue and sends the tunes back down. And all the old buck dancers, they'll rise up from the ground. And they hike their pants and begin to dance at the edge of the sleepy town. And the high-top boots flatten out the roots of the trees for miles around. Them spirits starting stomping when they hear them fiddle tunes. And they dance all night in the pale blue light of the old buck dancer's moon. Well, it happens every year or so when the tunes are extra hot. And they hold ghostly contests just to see what all they got. There's the one-armed man who leads the band. There's even old Joe Clark. And when they start stomping, all the dogs begin to bark. And the people in the village think they're howling at the moon. But if you listen close enough, they're howling right in tune. And they hike their pants and begin to dance at the edge of the sleepy town. And the high-top boots flatten out the roots of the trees for miles around. Them spirits start stomping when they hear them fiddle tune. And they quit all night in the pale moonlight of the old buck dancer's moon. tunes are finished and the air is sweet and clear. They're slapping backs and making tracks and they all disappear. So fiddlers, rosin up your bows and do what you do best. Fill the air for another year while the old buck dancers rest. Just to hike their pants and begin to dance at the edge of the sleepy town. And the high top boots flatten out the roots of the trees for miles around. Them spirits starting stomping when they hear that fiddle tune. And they dance all night in the pale blue light of the old buck dancers.
Cool.
You know,
That's a really cool one. Especially like hearing where you got it from. It's really neat.
Yeah, and did you recognize the melody?
I do.
Boil the cabbage down, boys, tearing them hotcakes round. The only song I ever could sing was Boil Them Cabbage Down. It's an old song. Boil them cabbage down.
Okay.
Mine was called Buck Dancer's Moon. But a lot of people have, and that's me talking about the music and it lasting. That's what a lot of people have been doing, is taking the old melodies,
Right.
and using those old melodies to build new songs. Guy Clark did one with Sean Kemp called Sis Draper, and they use Arkansas Traveler. Take your shoes off in the corner, mama, tuck them babies all up snug. Sis Draper's coming over, we're all gonna cut a rug. When you see that lantern swinging yonder, coming up the hollow road, then dogs start to barking, you better tie 'em all up with a rope. Well, you boys better get in tune, Sis Draper's gonna be here soon. Don't shoot no dice or get too tight if you wanna pick with Sis tonight. Well, she came down from the Boston Mountains, there was lightning in the air. There was honey on them fiddle strings, magnolias in her hair. Well, she's a diamond in the rough, if you can't see the shine, that's tough, she'll play all night for the likes of us. Sis Draper's got the touch, she'll play all night if she feels like it. Have some fruit punch if you spike it, she don't care if you don't like it, she's got a hell of a bow on. Stepped up and sawed one off, and Uncle Cleve dropped his jaw, said, she's the best I ever saw, she must be from Arkansas. Well, I think Grandpa used to date her, Grandma says she still hates her, and all the fellas stand up straighter in the presence of Sis Draper. Sis Draper, she's the devil's daughter, plays the fiddle daddy bought her, plays it like her mammy taught her, she's a traveling Arkansawyer. She put her fiddle in a case, said it's getting awful late. She was on her way to Little Rock, and Little Rock won't wait. So we all stood out in the yard, hands all full of watermelon, watched her leave and watched her go, wishing we was in that wagon. Sis Draper, she's the devil's daughter, plays that fiddle daddy bought her, played it like her mammy taught her, she's a traveling Arkansawyer. It's an old tune, an old melody with a new story, and Sis Draper apparently was a real person. Sean Camp knew down in Arkansas, but it's obviously like set back in the holler someplace.
Yeah.
And so it's fun when people do that stuff, because those melodies, they're irresistible.
They really are.
I mean, the tradition comes from the old, partly from the old broadside tradition. You know what the broadsides were?
No.
Back in England, I mean, years and hundreds of years, probably. That's how people got the news. Everybody knew the melodies. So they would write the news up to fit a melody that people knew, and people would sing it, because it's easier to remember things when they're poetry or songs.
And we'll be picking up on that topic on Bob and I's next episode together, coming up very soon. Thank you for listening to the Planet Shivers podcast. This production and others can be found on iTunes, SoundCloud, and archives.org. It can also be found with video content on the Albert Shivers YouTube channel. You can find even more content on Facebook at Albert Shivers Visual Artist and on Instagram at Albert Shivers. You can find Isaac Wilson's work on Instagram at WhenInZen. That's when_in_Zen. Thank you again for listening, and don't forget to like and subscribe.